reference it, nobody gets it. Like, I say Pacific Phoenix, and they're like, what are you talking about? All right. Good evening, everybody. Hey, how y'all doing? How was Monday? Was Monday Monday, or we all right? Yeah, it's a little chilly. I don't know if I feel like winter and spring are fighting over custody of the earth, and we're just all in the middle. And like, but but spring only want to show up like with pollen and allergies, and so yeah, it's a weird thing. I think we got a couple people. If this is your first time, would you raise your hand? Not. What's up, y'all? What's up? What's up? It's not your first time. You were here last week. Hey, real quick, what are your names? Just I know y'all told me, but I don't think y'all told everybody. You can do whatever you want. You want to stand? You want to sit? You can break dance. Nice to meet you, Carissa. What's up, Ivan? I feel like people know you, and that's a good thing. All right. Who else? Nice to meet you, Trini. Hey, Laya. All right. So cool. We are coming around the corner on this discussion we've been having around. We started off last month talking about growth. This month we've been talking through the concept and the idea of community. And so we're going to open with a little game. So the premise of this game is you're placed in a scenario, and based on the scenario, you have two choices. You have two choices, and you have to decide who you're calling, okay? Seems simple enough. We all get it. We're good? All right. First one, you have to make a movie, and you have to choose a director. Who are you calling? You got to pick one of them. Okay, thank you, because I didn't know what you. Okay, all right. Who said Tyler? Why? Some of the Tyler people. Somebody say something. So many great reasons. I mean, he built this entire empire literally off of one main character and a dream of prayer. He was homeless, and look at him now. So yes, I'm calling him. Okay. Okay. Somebody else picked Tyler, right? Who else picked Tyler? Why? Okay. All right. So, Ian, you say Ava? Okay. Okay. Go ahead, Kevin. Play the long game. Play the long game. All right. Next scenario, you need somebody to tell somebody off. Who are you calling? Okay, all right, okay, all right, we're talking. Who says Nene? We heard from. Why Nene in the back? Somebody. Nene is the reason why a whole lot of people are afraid to have white appliances. Like, you just automatically feel shame. Who says she said Tabitha? Why? It's gonna be real church mothery, ain't it? Like, and smile at you and then make you feel bad all at the same time. Yeah, like you. You said what? I'm nope, because Reggie, you admitted to being petty last week, and then when I asked you about it, it was a whole thing for 7 days, 7 whole days, like Tony Braxton said. So, but yeah, it's all right. So next scenario, you need somebody to come sing for you. Who are you calling? Okay, all right. Who says Jill? Chelsea, why Jill? Oh, wait, you were eating. Avery, why Jill? Okay, all right. Uh, Around the park after dark. All right, you want to say, find a Revelation, yeah, 17. Or maybe we could just be silent, you know? Who said Erica? Anybody say Erica? Why Erica? It is. Yeah, you'll be able to just kind of chill out, be mellow. Okay, all right. Huh? What? For what? I just got called childish, and I don't even know what I did. Sorry, I have to beat allegations now for the rest of the night. All right. Next scenario: you are making a song, and you need to pick someone for a feature. Who you calling? All right. Okay. All right. All right. Who says Drake? Drake. Why? Somebody. Why we picking Drake? Okay. 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 All right. Who said Kendrick? Why? Why? One of y'all. Why Kendrick? I don't. I don't know about that, D. Uh, she's so. Sure, there's a different, but I'll say this: one of these people has been running from another one for years. All right, next one is a basketball game. You're down 2 points, and you only got time for one shot. Who's taking the shot? Ivan, you said LeBron. Why? I saw you, dude. I saw you. I saw you, man. Okay, so you trust in LeBron. One of the Steph people. Why? Because it's Steph. Okay, fair enough. All right. You need a lawyer. Which one are you calling? Okay, all right, all right. Okay, who said meth? So, okay, so Kendra, hold on, y'all. So you're choosing meth just because Proctor died. I ain't got nothing to do with that one. Okay, who said Proctor? That is true. That is true. That that's actually, I wasn't thinking about all of that. Wow, a whole lot of family trauma there. All right, next scenario, cause girls is players too. You got yourself in trouble. Who you calling to get you out? All right. Kimbra. Oh my God, that was so terrible. Who said Annalise? Why? Why Annalise? Okay. Who said? All right. Who's join? So which one you calling? That's the point. You you got to pick, guys. You got to. Okay. All right. Why we calling Olivia? Mm. Okay. All right. So based on Reggie's logic. Reggie said one knows how to get you out of it. The other one knows how to cover it up. I didn't say that. And I did not say that if you vote for Annalise, you're a murderer. That's what you just said, and I'm just saying it in the microphone so that we all can hear. All right. All right. Last one. Last one. You are putting a school together, and you have to pick a principal. Which one are you picking? Okay. Uh, so all right. Anybody not picking Joe Clark? Don't say that out loud no more, Reggie. Turn your quiet voice back on. So, okay. But Joe was a little crazy, guys. Yeah, but I don't know if they need to be suspended for 10 days for not knowing the school song. Fair, fair, fair. Okay. All right. You smoke crack, don't you? Don't you smoke crack? All right. Jump. So the point, right? The point of this is that every now and again we all get in a situation. Oh, dang, I'm about to quote. I almost quoted the song. We all need somebody to lean on. Anyway, so we all find ourselves in situations where we have to depend on other folks for stuff, right? Where we have to reach out and ask folks for things. And so that's the heart of our discussion tonight around community, right? That community actually provides and gives us a safe place where we can lean on each other, all right? So let's look at Galatians, the 6th chapter, and the first 5 verses. Galatians, that's in the New Testament. Galatians chapter 6, verses 1 through 5. And we'll do like we've been doing. So once you get that at your tables, read it over together. And then that's clear. Okay. Look through the same kind of 5 things that we've been looking at as we've been studying these scriptures. We want to look at the background, so the context, right? What leads us to this point? Um, See what you can find around the author and the audience. Who wrote this? What are they trying to write? Or who are they writing to, rather? Then summarize it after you read it, like basically what's happening, what's the point of this, what does this say? Invitation, instruction, what are we being invited or called to do as a result of reading this passage, like what is God asking us to do through this particular passage? And then based on that, some challenges, some confusions we have, some stuff we read that says, I don't know if that makes sense, and then some other things that we read that say, I can't do this on March the 20th, the day after the 19th, the national holiday. But I can't do this on March the 20th, 2023 because, and you fill in that blank. So let's take a few minutes. Let's read over Galatians 6, 1 through 5, talk through those things at the table, and we'll come back together and talk about what we talked about, and then we'll be done talking. All right? Cool. Oh, I can't cut it off, right? Okay. something for me? Can you hit a little rich flex for me? All right, all right, guys. So let's come back together, talk through it. Um, so Galatians 6, verses 1 through 5, context. What do we know? How did we get to this point in the writing? Like, what's happened before this? Anybody got anything? No? Okay. So basically, this is the kind of like last week, right? It's the 6th chapter out of 6, so it's the last one. So let's look at a little bit what leads us to this point. These 5 verses are part of a larger kind of framework or a larger portion that deals specifically with mutual help and service, right? So first part, Paul does the greeting in the first 10 verses, and then spends a lot of time talking in a personal portion of this letter, chapters 1 and 2. Then he spends a lot of time like addressing some people, and we'll get into that in a little bit in 3 and 4. Then the early part of chapter 5 is devoted to what Christian freedom or liberty looks like. The back half of chapter 5 is devoted to drawing this connection between, or not necessarily connection, but looking at a juxtaposition between flesh and spirit. We get to our part that talks about mutual help and service. Then he has this one verse that's pretty interesting that talks about how he bears. That's pretty much the culmination of everything that he's been talking about as it relates to the refutation and all of that other kind of stuff. And then he gives his farewell. So that's just a larger kind of framework so that you have a fuller understanding of the context of like what's being said, why it says it, and why it's placed here. Do we know anything about the author and the audience? Who wrote this? All right, Paul. Who's Paul? Yes. His name was at one point Saul. What else? What do we know about Paul? Apostle to the Gentiles. That's actually very important here. So Paul writes this letter, and he writes it specifically to the church in Galatia. That's where we get the name Galatians. Some of the epistles are kind of named, or the letters are named after the person who wrote them, and then some of them are named after the place that they are addressed to. And because this is a letter addressed to the Galatians, the book has the name Galatians. So the gist of this is that Paul writes this book he goes to this region, Galatia, right? Plants this church here, and then because Paul is like doing all of his Paul stuff, he has to leave. But while he leaves, he gets word that people have kind of crept in and have started kind of spreading this stuff about him and also about the church itself, because they were teaching the church in Galatia that you're not really Christian unless you start doing all of this, unless you start following all of these customs from the Old Testament, from Hebrew scripture, right? That it don't really stick unless you do all of these things and keep all of these rules. Specifically, circumcision, because of the culture, a lot of the men there were not circumcised, and so these people were coming in saying, hey, you got to get the cut if you want it to count, right? And so one of the ways that they were seeking to discredit Paul's work was to discredit Paul himself. So Paul takes time to write this letter to this church because he now has to tell them, number one, that your relationship with God isn't based on the number of rules that you can keep, right? And he explains this to them. And also he's explaining, but since we here, let me tell you why you shouldn't listen to these people who tell you shouldn't listen to me, right? So a good portion of this book is spent addressing their false claims and then also kind of establishing the fact that your relationship with Christ is not based on how many rules you keep. It's a matter of your actual relationship, being led by the Spirit of God, right? All right, so let's summarize it. In your own words, the first 5 verses of chapter 6, the ones we read together or at our own table if our name is Tay. Um, what's, what's happening? What's going on here? What's he saying? Ian, go ahead. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's basically it. Yeah, like that everybody everybody there's this theme of struggle, right? There's this theme of help. And then there's also this theme that says while you're helping yourself, also help somebody else and vice but while you're helping others also, yeah, help yourself. Minister Reed? Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Very, very, very much so. There's a common theme of that's very prevalent throughout this, right? The treatment of others. Um, Pastor Chris quoted, I think, yesterday that John says, "How can we say we love a God that we can't see, and then mistreat our brother and sister that we see on a daily basis?" So that's a good kind of segue into the next thing. So what else are we being called to, invited, instructed to do in these 5 verses? Help restore. Okay. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, that's cool. That's good. Like, yeah, uh, we are called very much and very explicitly in this to restore people, right? That's if someone's overtaken, the first kind of verb, right, is for us to do the work of bringing someone back into the fold, to basically make sure that they're in the position that they were before whatever popped off in their life. Yeah. What else? What else are we called to invited or instructed to do here? Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah, it's an interesting kind of balance that we see being stricken here, right? That on one hand, the instruction is for us to ensure that we're taking care of everybody else, but then at the same time, we have instructions to also take care of ourselves. Yeah, it's almost and we see that as a kind of a running theme because when Jesus talks about the greatest commandments is number one, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, your mind, your soul, and your spirit. And then also to love your neighbor, but not just love your neighbor any old kind of way. Love your neighbor as you love yourself, which by implication suggests it's kind of difficult to love your neighbor if you don't first love yourself, right? And so this is sort of that same kind of fine line we see, that on one hand, we're called to help out those who are in a weaker place, right? But then on the other, you also got to look out for you too. And when I say look out for you, I don't mean it in the selfish kind of way that we kind of hear culturally, right? That ensure that you're the priority, make sure that you're the only one that's taking care of you. Yes, but also making sure that you realize that just because something happened to somebody else, it don't mean that it can't happen to you too. Yeah, right? That our help for others shouldn't come from a place of pride that says, this happened to you, and the reason why it happened to you is because you're not me. Because passages like this and, life itself, I've learned, will teach you never to say what you won't do. Because it's easy to say what you'll never eat while your stomach is full. But if you get hungry enough for long enough, you'll surprise yourself. You're not yourself when you're hungry, exactly. Kendra, go ahead. Yes. Even though we all seem to be spiritual, does this mean that when we're acting in this space, we're acting on the spirit that's within us and not on ourselves because of the balance? So that's a good question. That's a good question, right? When this passage says that the spiritual ones are to restore one in the spirit of gentleness, part of the reason that it says that, and this is why context is important, because chapter 5, this is at the beginning of chapter 6. Chapter 5 ends by talking about the fruit of the Spirit, right? That one of the fruit of the Spirit is gentleness. Meaning that, so yes, when we are acting in a way, and then it also says, if we live by the Spirit, we're guided by the Spirit, right? So when we act in ways where we handle people gently, or I put too many syllables in that word, but that's okay. When we handle people gently, right? That we are acting in a way that best reflects the spirit that we say lives in us. You get what I'm saying? So that's why it says you who are spiritual, because again, it's directly connected to the verses right before it that talked about what life and living in the spirit looks like when you're living with people. Make sense? Yeah. What else? What else are we called to do, to act like? What else is this passage telling us to do? Mm-hmm. It's a matter of the heart. Why, if you're going to go to your brother, as it's saying for us to do that regarding their transgressions, what is the space it's coming from? Mm-hmm. What is the intent behind you going? You know what I mean? Is it a clout chase, or is it because you genuinely want to see them get set free from whatever has them bound? Yeah. I think it's very much a call for us to examine our intentions. That we shouldn't help folks just so we can say that we helped them. It's easy to be like, we shouldn't help people and then take pictures of it on Facebook. Sure, right? Sure. That's bad to brag about helping because that's almost like bragging about being humble. At some point, you lose the plot, right? But on a more subtle level, if we're helping folks just so that we can hold it over their head for the next 5, 10 years, if we're helping folks just so that we can make ourselves feel better about helping them, it's a call to re-examine the motive behind all of it. You know what I mean? Because looking at somebody and saying that I'll never be in that position is almost just as prideful as saying, or as helping somebody just so that you can feel better about it. Go ahead. Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, 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 very much so. Like, and that's part of what we talked about last week too, right? That we have to be careful not to violate people's vulnerability, right? Because to go to someone for help is in and of itself a vulnerable act. And not everybody, some people are much more comfortable being vulnerable than others are. There are some people who, whenever they need help, they just gonna ask for it for whatever reason. And then you got some people who, like me, almost have to be on their deathbed before they let you help them. Exactly. And because you don't know, right? Sometimes we only know how people are. We don't always know how they got that way, right? And when we just do stuff like that, we don't know how that triggers somebody. We don't know how it affects their social progress or their mental state. And so we have to be very careful when we are approached for help that we honor it the way that we would want people to honor ours, right? That if I wouldn't want nobody telling my business, I'm not going to tell nobody else's. You get what I'm saying? Yeah, that the implication is too, with that same spirit of gentleness, right? That's part of it. That's part of being gentle with people, to handle it with care. Yeah, Mr. Ian. Mm. Yes. Mm-hmm. And even if you stay at home, you still get hurt. Yeah. Yeah, very much so. Very much so. Like the 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 silent implication of this text is that you naturally have the consent of the one who's transgressed, right? Yeah, fair. That's fair. But I think I see you, Chelsea. Matter of fact, go ahead. Go ahead. So we'll get to that. Good question. Um, but yes, the implication here is that you have the consent of the one who's been overtaken to help, right? And I think in our context, and perhaps even in theirs as well, that uh, that's where that gentleness comes in. Because if you come in forcing your help on people, you're helping, but how gentle is it? And sometimes uh, they say in life, they say with lifeguards are trained when people are drowning to wait. And not wait because they want to see people suffer, not wait because they want to see people die. They have to wait because if they jump in too soon, while the people are still fighting and struggling, they'll struggle with the person trying to save them, and then eventually everybody dies. Not because there's no one in the water who can save them, but because they're not in a position where they can receive the help. You see what I'm saying? And sometimes, as well-meaning as our intentions are, we have to wait until we're allowed to help folks, right? Like the vampires on True Blood, they can't enter the house until somebody says, you may enter. Now, nobody in here is a vampire, I don't think. But it's the point, right, that we have to wait for others to embrace us and to be willing before we can just hop out there thinking that we just gonna do something good for somebody just because we feel like doing it. And that they better receive our help because we didn't have to help them. No, you didn't, but you also could have asked first. You also could have helped more gently. Yeah. So what else? What else are we called to do, invited to do, instructed to do in these verses? Go ahead. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's real good. That self-examination is a key part of this too. It's a call to you got to pay attention to a bunch of things all at the same time, right? Like you have to pay attention to the needs and the dispositions of the people around you. You got to pay attention to what's going on around you, right? But then while you're doing that, also pay attention to what's happening within you. You see what I'm saying? Uh, that it's a call to, as you are helping others, it's like Jesus was talking one day around the time that a national tragedy had taken place, and some towers fell down, and Jesus was like, hey, guys, so don't think that the thing that happened with the towers happened because they didn't pray. Don't think that the tragedy struck them and didn't strike you because you're holier than they are. Understand, tragedy happens to everybody, and if there's one takeaway from it, it should be that you should be in a perpetual state of self-examination. That you ought to make sure that your heart's in the right place, right? So while you're paying attention to the needs of everybody else, is also an examination of what's going on internally within you. You get what I'm saying? And honestly, that's a hard thing to do, especially at a time where our attention spans are steadily shrinking. Right? We'll pull up a video on YouTube, and if it says it's 5 minutes, that's too long. Think about that. 5 minutes is a long time now. Because we've been trained to, some of us remember Vine, and we had to get a whole story in 6 seconds. Some of us remember, Instagram only gave you 15 seconds of video. And you had to get everything else out. You know what I mean? All in 15. Do you know how short 15 seconds is? You know what I mean? And in an era of shrinking attention spans that say we don't develop the discipline or the time now because we're taught culturally not to sit with stuff. You put something in the air fryer, it's done in 8 minutes. Or less. You know what I mean? Like, everything happens instantly. You order something, it can get there the same day. Sometimes it'll get there the next day. And then if you really got to wait, it's going to be there in 3 days. You know what I'm saying? We are habitually in a system and in a rhythm that says do not wait for anything. And that is not how life works. That sometimes some stuff takes development, and development takes time. Right? That if parents who are expecting wish to have a child with as few complications as possible, they have to wait 40 weeks. Because development has to take place over the course of 40 weeks. You can't just pop out a child in 2. You could, and there could be complications, and I apologize if that example triggers anyone else's past life experiences. But the point I'm making is that sometimes, in order for things to develop fully, they have to take time. That things don't always happen instantly. Right? And yeah, so that's one of those things that we have to always kind of examine ourselves. All right. Anything else that we're called to do as a result of this? I thought I saw another hand up. Anybody else? Okay. All right. So let's look at some challenges, some confusion, some things that made us go, that's weird. We got one as it relates to the question about testing our own work. Anything else that's weird about these verses? Anything else that says, all right, I hear what you're saying, but I can't do that because this, right? What are some things that challenge us as it relates to how we live this thing out? Yeah. Yeah, the notion that we are called to carry somebody else's stuff in addition to all of our own stuff can be a daunting one when we examine how heavy our own stuff is. Right? Yeah. That. Yeah, sometimes that's a very real place because sometimes we feel like we're being called to do things that are beyond our capacity, that are beyond our ability to do. Yeah, that's real. What else? What else is a challenge, is a concern, is something that confuses us? How do we help those that don't want to be helped? Very real, because again, we can be as gentle as we want to be, but that don't mean that they're in a position to be helped. What else, Reggie? Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's true. That this, the context of this, you're right. It starts with the scenario that a person is overtaken in a fault, in a sin, in a transgression. And so the call then to respond, to restore, the response of restoration is how we bear someone else's burden that in its original context is not talking about, like you said, having, being just the dumping bag for somebody else, right? That you're not the garbage disposal. That's not, you're not a place where everybody just comes and lays all of their emotional stuff on you. Yeah, yeah. And so it's important to bear that in mind. Ian? Mm. Yep. Talk good. Talk good, Ian. Yeah, talk good. That, but yeah, that's real, right? That I was going to mention the what we call the passion narrative, right? The story of the crucifixion. That even as Jesus is carrying the cross because of the experiences that he has gone through in the hours leading up to it, there's a moment where Jesus, the Jesus, is too weak to carry something up a hill. And in that space, Jesus don't try to be Superman. Because if anybody could be Superman, it could have been Jesus. And Jesus collapses under the weight of the cross. And in the moment when he collapses, there just so happens to be someone in his community nearby. By the way, not for nothing, who's an African. Right? No, he's not Chicken George. But there happens to be someone in his community nearby surrounding him who's able to carry the weight that life has placed him in a position where he cannot carry himself. Right? And this is a spiritual picture of what this looks like, right? That sometimes we get ourselves into stuff not realizing how heavy it is. But in those moments, so a friend of mine was telling me he was at the gym and he was lifting, but he went by himself, right? And he got too ambitious that day. So he's on the machine and he's lifting. It's one of the Smith machines that's got the bar, but also got a little bit of help. But he still put too much weight on there. And the first rep, everything was cool. I mean, it wasn't really cool, but it was cool enough, right? Second rep, it goes up. Then he realized sometimes things go down quicker than they go back up. So he's got this weight, this bar on his chest, and he realizes at this point he can't get it up by himself. Trying as hard as he can. And it's not until he gets the attention of a group of people nearby and they come over and they're able to help him lift the thing. Because to Reggie's point earlier about context, especially the immediate context of this passage, in a spiritual sense, this is someone who's overtaken by something that they can't get themselves out of. And in those moments, we have to surround ourselves with people who see us struggle and then not only see us, but also are able to do something about it. That they come over and say, I recognize what your weakness is, and I'm here to help you so that even though you're weak, we're going to get this thing off of you. Right? That's the call. That's the call for us to bear one another's burden. Any other challenge? Yeah, Tay. Yeah, you can put so much energy into helping folks that you don't have energy to get help yourself. And the danger of pride is that it's subtle. Because if you always saw pride coming, you know what to do about it. But it's easy to convince yourself that I'm the helper to the point where you don't know what it's like to get help. Yeah. All right. Yeah, Kendra, go ahead. Not yet, Paul. So I'm ready now, Paul. That's a good segue into a few things that we need to talk about regarding these 5 verses, and then we'll wrap up for the evening. All right. So the first kind of takeaway is that our intentions and our actions don't always line up. Right? The opening passage, again, context is important, and that's full disclosure, right? One of the reasons why we kind of look through the same things every week is because these are some of the things that we need to look for every time we read a passage of Scripture, right? So that we don't just kind of isolate it and just kind of throw some verses up against the wall to see what sticks, so we can kind of see in full totality what a passage is saying and what it actually means. So this passage opens talking about if a person is overtaken in a transgression. Prior to that, again, Paul lays out what it means to live a life that's led by the Spirit of God. And contrast that with what a life in the flesh looks like. The reason why this opens up with a transgression is because it's saying, this is what you should aim for. This is what you should go after. This is the direction that you should walk in. But in the instance that you don't, this is what you do. The reason why that's important is because it sends the message that we can very much intend to live a life that's led by the Spirit, and then, for whatever reason, not live up to the thing that we're going after. Because sometimes we can intend to do a thing, but our actions don't always line up with it. Not because we wanted them to or didn't want them to, right? We didn't mean, because that's what this overtaking is, right? This is not carte blanche for you to be taken advantage of. This isn't about somebody who chooses to be trifling over and over and over again. This is a passage that talks about someone who is well-intended and meaning to walk in the right direction, but it's interesting that in the original language, they're not necessarily sure whether or not this transgression overtakes a person or if they just happen to be caught in it. Meaning that, and I think that's interesting because it's one of them things where, to me, it doesn't matter. Right? It doesn't matter if they are beyond their own individual capability, or if we just happen to stumble up on somebody who finds themselves overwhelmed by something. In either regard, our response ought to be the same. That we ought to know that just because this person didn't always intend to end up this way, that they had good intentions, but life happens in a way, the same way that it happens to all of us. And because of that, we talked about this a little bit, we're called to gentleness, not judgment. That when we see somebody struggling with something, our response is to handle them in a way that's gentle and not in a way that condemns them for being in the position that they're in. Right? Because it's easy to look at folks and say, well, you should have made better decisions, and that's how you ended up there. Because our love is shown in how we care for one another. So, verse 2 says that we are to bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. You know what that law of Christ is? The first thing we talked about the first week. To love. Again, when Jesus says, what's the greatest, most important foundational commandment? Jesus says all of it summed up in this. You love the Lord your God, and you love your neighbor as yourself. Because it's also showing, and Ian touched on this a little bit, that when we take on or when we're able to help people carry their stuff, that's when we look the most like God. Because the image that we're given is that we are to cast our stuff onto God. And sometimes the only God people will see is when we step in to help folks with their stuff. Right? So our love is shown in how we care for and how we carry one another. That when we're really loving and really loving the way we should, in the moments, first of all, love creates an environment where you feel like it's okay that I can be weak sometimes. Where you don't have to put up this facade of perpetual strength. This veneer that says, I got it all together all the time, don't nobody come see about me. Because love chips away at all of that and says, okay, this is who I really am. Because it's easy to love the idea of a person and not the actual person. All right? And so, last thing, and we've talked about this, and this is really interesting to me, that our standards dictate our assessments. So the back half of this passage that we read, right? When Paul talks about testing your own work and bearing your own load and carrying, in some translations actually use that same word, that bear your own burden, right? And it's weird because how is it that one sentence you say carry somebody else's stuff, and then a few seconds later you say, now carry your own stuff? Here's why. Because the point of the back 3 verses is to say that you shouldn't judge yourself in comparison to nobody else. That's bad English. Sorry. The rubric is not how other people are doing. That you're not always doing good just because you can find somebody that's doing worse than you. That you're not always doing a good thing just because you can find somebody who did a worse thing than you did. Because at the end of the day, you still have the same vulnerabilities. And sometimes the difference between you and the person whose burden you're being called to bear is that they got caught and you didn't. Or that theirs is public and yours isn't. Right? So, when you have the courage to be honest with yourself, it tells you that, okay, maybe I'm not as good as I think I am. Maybe I don't have it all the way together like I'm supposed to, and just because I'm in a position where I can help somebody else, because the intent of these last 2 verses, right, about testing your own work and having reason to boast, it's not saying, again, that you ought to make yourself feel big by making somebody else feel small. It's to say that your progress isn't measured by how farther you are than the people behind you. Your progress is measured by how close you are to the place where God is calling you to be. So that ultimately, God is not going to judge you in comparison to anybody else. God judges you based on what you do in response to what God calls you to do. And if you spend all of your time trying to assess somebody else's journey, you'll miss out on your own. You'll crash your car every time you try to drive through somebody else's windshield. That when you do what you're supposed to be doing, and this is what I've discovered, that when you devote all of your time to minding your own business, you really ain't got that much time to devote to everybody else's. Right? That when you spend all of your time minding your own business, you don't have that much time to devote to everybody else's. They heard me. This mic is loud. But because we can get so busy in measuring our progress based on how much progress the person next to us has not made, that we'll get an inflated sense of our own ego and our own worth. When God ain't calling us based on somebody else's journey. God measures us based on what God told us to do. Right? And so, our assessments of ourselves spiritually shouldn't happen based on how we judge everybody else around us. The assessments that we ought to make of ourselves are to be based on, what did God tell me to do? Because God ain't going to ask you about somebody else. God's not going to ask you to turn in somebody else's assignment. God's going to ask you about what God asked you to do. But they didn't. Okay, but what did I ask you to do? But I did better than, okay, but what did I ask you to do? It's not about how much better that you did than somebody else, or how much better you feel you did than somebody else, or how much worse somebody else did than you. Where are we in relation to where God has called us? All right? All right, so 2 things before we conclude for the evening. Number 1, we're gearing up, ramping up for Easter. And Easter, there's a whole lot going on. We've got 4 services happening over the course of those 2 days. So on Saturday, we've got an afternoon service, and then on Sunday, we're doing a service at 6, 8, and 10. Because of that, because we have so much happening, we need people, and especially people in our age group, we need us to start plugging into the life of the church so we can volunteer in some places. And so I'm going to ask you all to scan this QR code here. When you do that, it'll give you a bunch of options where you can kind of plug in and learn more information. Learn more information about where you can get plugged in, where you can volunteer. And you never know, sometimes stuff like this is how we find out where God is calling us, because sometimes God meets us in these random serendipitous moments like this, right? So I want to invite everybody to scan this code, fill out this form, get plugged in a place, and then you'll learn more information. Now, for those that fill out this form, because it's a church-wide thing, next Monday, they're going to be talking people through what that specific branch of service looks like wherever they have decided to plug in, and they'll be using the chapel to do that. So because of that, our sessions are going to look a little different. Instead of meeting here, we're just going to meet in the places where we've registered and where we've signed up. Cool? We got that? We all clear? All right. Second thing is that Mom Harris gave me this note to tell y'all that there are brownies available for everyone tonight. I've already had one. Trust me, guys, they're really good. Wait, what? I can't. Reggie, you know you talk. Oh, Ian, okay. Ian said don't come get them, but I can neither confirm nor deny that he's saying that so that he can have like all of them for himself and or like a few others. But yeah, there are brownies available for everybody. Let's see, we did this, didn't get a chance to do this last week. Last thing is, anybody working at a place that is hiring or know someone that's hiring? You said what? Okay, what does a person need to work at the daycare? Okay, so a high school diploma, where should they look up online? Where should they go? Precious Cargo Academy. Okay, so they look up Precious Cargo Academy? Yes, ma'am. Okay, ontheborder.com. All right, go ahead. FedEx is hiring as well. You know any positions in particular, or are they just hiring? Okay, handler. Okay, all right. So anybody looking to work for FedEx as a handler? Yes, ma'am. You said American Airlines reservation? Okay, and they can just look up American Airlines or go on AA.com? Okay, cool. All right, so you've heard those places, you've heard those resources. Hopefully that can be of help and of service to you. Paul, we good? Anything else? Okay. All right, so guys, let's have a word of prayer, and thank y'all for hanging out this evening. Thank y'all for those who are hanging for the first time. Hopefully we'll see y'all again. And yeah, we had fun tonight, right? Yeah, all right, let's pray. God, thank you for the gift of community. Thank you for the gift of vulnerability. Thank you for sacred spaces where our vulnerability can be handled with care. And thank you for giving us the ability to handle others with gentleness as well. For the privilege of service in the spaces where people trust us. God, we pray that we would reflect your gentleness, that we would be reflections of the grace that you've bestowed upon us, that we would cease to judge people who are fallen, that we be reminded that sometimes even when we choose to go in one direction, it's possible for all of us to make a wrong turn. And when we find somebody who's made a wrong turn, we help them get back on the path that they need to be on. So God, would you give us an honesty that is an antidote to pride? Would you cause us to reflect on where you've called us to be so that we don't get caught up in our sense of accomplishment, our sense of progress, and feel better for making others feel bad? God, help us to reach for you in honest and in sincere ways. We'll get it wrong sometimes. But when we do, would you surround us with those who help us get it right again? So that ultimately all of us can be a community of restoration. God, keep us safe. Watch over us as we travel. Be with us throughout the remainder of this week with all of the challenges and the ups and the downs that come along with it. Remind us of your presence. In Jesus' name, amen. All right. Thank y'all. See y'all next week.